Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. This show is going to take a little bit of a different direction. We are still going to talk about leadership, but we're going to talk about it from a parental point of view. The host of the Beyond Risk and Back podcast, Aaron Huey, joined me today, and he is going to talk about how this generation of teens are so resilient. He's going to talk about how social media, online bullying, cell phone addiction, all those things really come into play. And he's going to talk about choices that teens make and that parents make every day from a very different perspective, not just about bad choices or good choices. You are going to love every second of this conversation and hearing Aaron give this priceless advice. Don't go anywhere. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. I have got a tremendous leader and a tremendous guest today that is going to talk about some things that we don't normally talk about on this Leading from the Middle podcast. A lot of it has to do with business that we talk about, but boy, oh boy, this is pure leadership. And the gentleman that I am looking at right now is a pure leader. So I want to introduce the host of the Beyond Risk and Back podcast. Aaron Huey has joined me today. Aaron, it is so great of you to join me. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Kenny. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to your crowd. I really appreciate it. And I hope in this time we have together, I can give them some tips, tools, tricks, and tactics and techniques of their own leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you can. And it's always been my experience that managers that used to work for me, if it wasn't right at home, man, it wasn't right at work either. And so many things tie in together. But first, I really have to find out more about your backstory. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? It doesn't have to be a little bit. It could be as much as you want. But what led you to do this tremendous work that you're doing now with parents and with teens?
So I started as a kid without a father. Around 4 years old, my dad adopted me. So I've had no father and I've had an amazing dad. Really progressive mother and father. Dad was an incredible business leader, watched him my whole life just command success in his own way. My mom, the same thing, not only working at home with us kids, but also in the community, in the theater, in the HOA. She was always president of something, always a leader in her community, a La Leche League leader, the breastfeeding organization for women. Just really saw leadership in my house. I struggled immensely, very ADHD, still am to this day. And no father, was sexually assaulted, was bullied mercilessly, and really found myself at a low point choosing drugs, cannabis particularly, followed closely by alcohol and LSD as my crutch, right? Crutch is something you use when you've injured a limb and you can't put any weight on it. And so you use these things to help you get around in life. And you don't want to put weight on the limb because it hurts. And there was no one there to really show me how to put weight on it in a healing manner. And so I kept using the crutch until I was pretty much in my own proverbial wheelchair. And this crutch could be mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, financial crutches that we use. Mine was definitely emotional. If I was high, I was happy. If I was sober, I was suicidal. I did not have a happy childhood. I had amazing parents, but that doesn't, there's always an empty chair at the table where your bio parent is supposed to be sitting, and mine was always empty. So you try to put a lot of other people, places, and things there, and then none of it ever works. You learn how to live with the whole. I got sober in 1998, May 21st, 1998, had my moment of grace, hitting my knees and saying, please, please, please. Found myself in the 12-step room, slowly began to build my life back, starting with a small martial arts school in Boulder, Colorado. Martial arts has always been a golden thread throughout my life. My own Karate Kid moments in high school led up to just really feeling empowered to be able to say, you know what, I can teach this. And one of my first martial arts students was a little kid who I had worked with in a summer camp that I was the assistant director at. And his mom just flat out said, look, I caught him trying to commit suicide for the third time last night. He was 6 years old.
6 years.
And
Wow.
yeah. And she said, can you work with him? And what am I going to say? I don't know. Of course you say yes and you find or create a way. And so I did. Sat down with that kid the next day and said, okay, if you don't hurt yourself for 1 year and 1 day, when you feel like hurting yourself, you call one of these 3 numbers. If you know that you can talk and tell me about anything and everything, and I will never judge, I will never try to solve. I will just sit with you in the darkness like 2 warriors. For 1 year and 1 day, you can make life happen. I'll buy you a Viking sword. I'm happy to say he and I are still good friends to this day. He's 25 years old and he has a degree in Norse mythology and history.
Okay.
So, and he was with me when I got inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame last year for my work with traumatized, trafficked, and teens who are addicted and are self-harming and are dealing with mental health issues. That has been my go-to through the work of martial arts and running summer camps and opening my own, and then ultimately running a sober home for teen boys, which turned into a co-ed residential treatment facility for drugs, self-harm, and mental health issues. My wife and I were able to possess and profess the highest success rate in the United States. All kinds of awards came from that.
Yeah.
And when I shut down my facility because of the fires in Estes Park, we really sat down and said, why were we so successful? It's one thing to feel great, but it was very clear to us, even before we knew the answer before we asked the question. And the answer was, it wasn't because of what we did with kids. And we did great shit with kids. We had working with wolves, partial wilderness component, martial arts, our own school that specialized with kids who are struggling with ADD, great stuff. But our success rate came from the work we did with parents. Our parent intervention program in our treatment facility was bigger than anyone we could find.
Wow.
And that's why we had the best success rate, is because parents recovered. And so when the kids came home, they were living at home in an environment of comfort. So leading my staff to do this, training parents, getting parents to, we call it mirrors, not fingers. Hold up a mirror, don't point a finger.
Yes, love it.
Really looking at their own lives and their own ability to lead their kids from home and to take their homes back, and to lead with a strong back and open heart and a clear mind, not one of fatigue, frustration, fury, or fear. And that's where our success came from. So when we closed the facility, I continue the work with the podcast, with training parents one-on-one, with teaching coaches how to work with families in deep crisis, not my teenager and I are arguing, but how to work with a family who calls and says, my teen tried to kill themselves last night. They're in an acute unit. What do I do when they come home? Those families need support. Those families need help. So that's our calling.
What an amazing story and an amazing journey. And from everything I've read and listened to you, you're actually being really, really modest, because you are in the trenches with parents and with kids. And I'm glad you added that in. It's not just the surface stuff that we as parents, deal with. It's deep stuff that you're into. So I want to and congratulations on the Hall of Fame, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. So let's get into a few of these things, because I want to ask you this, because resiliency comes up a lot when you speak, and we also compare generations a lot. What are some things that you do to talk to parents about being more resilient and not comparing the generations, and thus also talking to teens that you talk to about being resilient?
Let's deal with the generational thing first,
Yeah.
because as a Gen Xer, I have two millennial kids. One is 27, one is 28. So they're on the cusp of the Gen Z and the millennial generation. Um, this idea that these younger generations are less resilient than Gen Xers or boomers is crap.
Yes.
It's just utter BS. And here's why. Number one, human development has not changed. Society has, but humans still develop. We still develop energetic response. Our genetics are still in place. We are still becoming adults at the same speed that we always have. Brain development, the speed to which we develop has not changed. The information we have to process has. And that's causing some issues. There's an incongruency between development and what we have to work with to develop. So it's not these kids. We're seeing more trauma. We're seeing more anxiety. We're seeing more depression. And the idea that there's something wrong with these kids versus the acceptance that Gen Xers and boomers are walking wounded. We are traumatized. We just didn't have the technology and science and understanding of brain development and trauma to actually sit down and look in the mirror and go, I'm traumatized. Now, the other side of this is that what leads to resiliency issues, which we do see in the younger generation, are the following. Number one, we have been telling them that since they were born that if they don't recycle, their planet's going to crack in half and no one will survive. That's pretty traumatizing to tell a child. But yet, look at their posters on their school walls, their whole life. Yeah. Number one. Number two, show me a Gen Xer or a boomer who had to practice live shooter training drills. All right. Those are unbelievably traumatizing. I have an episode with a high school counselor that people should listen to because that's what we talk about. And I've worked with children in my facility who have been through school shootings. It's a forever thing. It doesn't go away. And they're children. They're not trained soldiers or police officers. Right. They're kids who are taught to hide, run, or fight someone with a gun, a child. Yeah. All right. So that's bringing up anxieties, depressions, and things that look like resilience. I wouldn't want to go to school. But most of all, the things that lead to resiliency issues are parents not handing the child's problems to the child. Okay, with proper support. Now, I'm not talking about life and death problems. I'm talking about my teacher doesn't like me. Well, you'll figure it out. You and your teacher will figure this relationship out. Now, if the teacher's being a bully kid, I'll go to the principal and your teacher and with you, and we will all sit down and hash this out. But otherwise, I trust you. You got as long as parents play the goalie on their child's soccer team, the children will never learn how to be the goalie and handle the problems. Resiliency is born in the forge of conflict. You are hammered, you are plunged into water, you are heated by the flame of conflict. And that's how we learn who we are. But if mommy and daddy, Gen Xers, handle it for them. If we reward children for everything we do, if we are constantly handing them cookies, second grade's over, graduation ceremony, third grade, graduation ceremony. Oh, your team came in last. And we know this. Your team came in last. Here's a trophy. It's the adults who are getting the trophies made, folks. It's not the kids. It's the adults who are putting on the graduation ceremonies, not the kids. You want resiliency? Treat them like they're resilient and hand them their problems back lovingly, appropriate to the age. But by God, that was the best thing. ADHD, all the learning disability struggles I had, my parents said, you'll figure it out. Yeah. I did.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved everything you said. It is so dead on. And as parents, we really need to get away from the comparison game because I think it's a trap.
Ridiculous.
And you're 100% right on the resiliency. Aaron, so you deal with a lot of kids and even parents that make some bad choices.
Yeah.
What are some things, what are some steps that you talk about to just help teens along to make better choices?
So let's reframe bad choices really quickly. There is no such thing as a bad choice,
Yes.
right? There are risky choices. But see, every choice we make as human beings, and I know I'm talking to leaders who are listening to this podcast. Understand this. If you want to know how to lead somebody, you have to understand why they do the things they do, why they make the choices they make. Now, you can stand in a position of the Almighty and judge other people's choices as bad or good. But the truth of the matter is, every choice is made on one of two concepts. Number one, cost and payoff, right? If we are getting more from the results of our choice, then that choice is costing us. We will continue to make that choice. I'm asked all the time. I give my teenager consequences and it doesn't seem to change the behavior. And that's because the behavior has a greater payoff than the consequences, right? Here's another way to say it. If the
Yeah.
consequences don't hurt, the consequences don't matter.
Mhm.
We're going to keep doing the thing. So that's number one. Number two is every choice we make, everything we do, my choice to be on the show, your choice to invite me to the show, our choice to email each other back and forth before the show, all of this was to facilitate a need, a
Mhm.
basic human need. Everything we do, when we eat, when we sleep, when we are intimate with our partners, when we decide to work with each other to make a company, to solve people's problems for a profit, whatever we decide is to facilitate a need. And there are five needs: safety, power, connection, freedom, and worth. Those five needs are the reason we make the choices they do. Children, teenagers have had on their school walls their whole life: don't smoke. Just don't do it. Don't smoke cigarettes. Don't vape. Don't do it, because nicotine will kill you. It's not a possibility, it's a probability, and it's a high probability that constant consumption of nicotine will end your life prematurely and possibly those of the people around you and that you love.
Right.
So why do teens smoke? Why do they make that risky choice? Well, I asked them for 15 years in our school, in our residential treatment program. I asked them, why do you smoke? You know, and we all know, why do you smoke? And they say, well, I get to take a break from my problems. I get to go outside and I hang out with my friends. Right? None of that has anything to do with the fact that they're ingesting a highly addictive poison that is slowly killing them. All of it has to do with safety, power, connection, freedom, and worth. I get to take a break. From what? Well, that's safety. Maybe school sucks. Maybe being at home sucks. And so they go outside to take a break from their life, right? Getting a break is safety, and hanging out with friends is connection.
Yes.
Mom and dad say no, and you say yes and do it anyway. That's kind of power. Freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from school, freedom from a stressful day at work, freedom from, well, a cigarette is meeting all of these needs, all
Yeah.
of them, every single one of them in one puff.
Wow.
That's why they do it. Now, find a consequence. Parents, leaders, your job is to find a consequence that not only has a greater cost than the payoff of the facilitated need, but see if you can find a consequence that also facilitates the need. And watch what happens. Watch what happens if all of a sudden, for example, the consequence is, if I catch you smoking, you and I have to go hiking every weekend. Not you're grounded and I'm taking your phone. That does not work.
Love that. Yeah.
But you and I have to go hiking because look, hiking, safety, power, connection, freedom, worth. I'm outside. I'm moving. I'm exercising. I'm releasing dopamine, on and on and on. Natural consequences that cost greater than the payoff of the need facilitation. That is how you can change someone's decision that is risky. But bad choices, they're not bad. I told you at the beginning, and this is a big deal. When I was high, I was happy. When I was sober, I was suicidal. Now tell me I should quit using drugs. Go
Mm.
ahead. Go ahead. Tell me. No, I know I have a daughter, and I know I have a wife, and I know I have 70 acres in the mountains of Colorado. I know I have a group of friends that comes up every weekend. But tell me I should stop using, when the moment I do, all of that is secondary to the fact that I am a fatherless, sexually assaulted, bullied child with ADHD Tell me why I should quit. Go ahead. Give me the greatest reason you can think of, and I'll tell you that smoking pot kept me alive.
Wow.
Until one day it
Yeah.
didn't. It cost me everything.
Hmm.
And that's called rock bottom.
Wow. Wow. It makes so much sense to me what you said, everything, every single word. And I especially, it is just amazing when you start to think about the need that it fills, just that smoking that one puff of a cigarette, and how as parents you can fulfill those same needs instead of just you're grounded and you're staying in your room for the weekend. You know what I mean? You can fulfill those same needs.
Right.
That it makes just so much sense. And I'm glad you said that about bad choices. I had heard you say it before, so I was kind of being a little facetious there. Um, I'm getting away from that, man. From telling my, hey, that was a bad choice. I'm just trying my best, since I've heard your podcast, to get away from that, because you're right. It's just a choice, and who can compare?
It can be risky.
Yes,
There's
yes,
cost associated with it that as a parent, as a boss,
yeah,
something I don't want us to incur the cost of the risk you just took.
yeah,
But connection before correction,
yes,
right? Not just correction, connection before correction. Hey,
absolutely.
that was a risky choice. Explain. You can stand there and be like, why are you doing this? This is a dumb decision. This is a stupid choice. This is a bad choice.
Yeah,
Versus, all right, that was a risky choice. And I need to understand your choice making process, because if we're going to work together, if I'm going to be dad, I want to make sure that I'm not just cutting you off. You get safety, power, connection, freedom, worth from this thing, and I take your cell phone. Well, I've just worsened it. I haven't made anything better. But
absolutely.
if I actually sit down and go, what's coming up for you? Like, what do you get from it? And I'm not mad that you get things from it. We know nicotine changes brain chemistry, but there's a ritual behind smoking.
Yeah,
What are you getting from the ritual? And then when the teen can tell you and you go, man, it makes sense that you're doing this. And I can't stop you, kiddo. I can't stop you from making risky choices. But what I am not willing to do is finance them.
yeah,
So if there are things that I realize I'm doing as a parent, it's making it easier for you to do these things. Like if you're buying drugs on the internet service that I'm providing, I will no longer be willing to provide that internet service, because if you're lying, stealing, sneaking, cheating, or breaking the law, I'm out. I'm not going to finance those things. I'm not going to support those things. I can't change your risky choices. Only you can.
mhm,
But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to love you. I'm going to sit in your darkness with you when I need to. But I'm also going to make sure I'm living my value system.
yeah. Still keeping those boundaries. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, I got you mentioned bullying, that happened to you in your life. And I can remember it happening to me a few times, and going home and being with my terrific mom and my brothers, and I forgot about it, right? Whereas that now, I go home and maybe there's a video that's been uploaded of me being bullied that everybody's watching, and I see it on my phone. Where does social media now and cell phones fit into everything that you're trying to really, really teach these kids and parents?
It's not going away, first and
Right,
foremost.
right,
So emotional intelligence is going to be the key to dealing with social media. Social media preys on the lowest common denominator. And we don't just have to look at teens. By God, let's look at how adults are handling social media and politics. Like, we literally bully each other online, literally. And so monkey see monkey too, baby. If it mirrors, not fingers, like before we sit to the kids and talk to them about bullying strategies, man, check your posts,
yeah,
because adults are being assholes to each other. And just plain and simple, it's not okay how adults speak to each other. So that's first. That first is adults getting emotionally intelligent. Second is, bullying is a serious issue. Online bullying is devastating. Why? Because it's out there forever. And
mm,
the kids understanding that from a very, very young age, the kids understanding that's important. That's how we begin to understand why we don't talk to strangers, that we don't say things or send things to people that we don't know, that we wouldn't do this face to face. We don't do it to strangers, because once it's out there for good, forever. That's a savviness We have to kill the naivety around social media before we sit down for ourselves, before we sit down to the kids and say, listen, you can't. Check yourself first. Second of all, do you really know what's going on there? Do you understand the algorithm and why things are being supported? Do you understand how to talk to your kid about bullies? Do you know how to deal with them? Are you talking to your kid about what it's like as an adult to have someone? There's a business I'm involved with a business app, and it got a bad review, and I answered it today. My kids would see me answer things. My daughter, the moment I was traveling a lot all over the world, I got her on Skype so that she and I can Skype back and forth. She was 12 years old. The moment she set a profile, someone sent her a dick pic, and she brought it right to me.
Yeah.
I said, all right, let's talk about the ways we could deal with this. And we're going to do the one that feels the best to you.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, we confront. Number two, we call the police. Number three, we tell them some big cockamamie story about how my dad is the head of the crimes division of the police department and we have your IP address. And that's the one she wanted to go with. So that's what she did. And we wrote back and we watched the guy's response and we talked about it. We spent the time in the darkness. Spend the time in the darkness. We as adults want to avoid conflict.
Yeah.
That's human nature.
Yes.
It hurts, but it's not violence. See, conflict and violence are two different things. Violence is where we disconnect. Conflict is still a connection point. So stay connected with your child in their conflict and show them how to stay connected in conflict.
Yeah.
Because conflict's deep connection if you really follow that path through the weeds.
And that really flips the script right on conflict, which again, you're right, man, as adults. I know for me, I run the other way, but you're right. It is it's deep connection and violence turns into something totally different. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. What great advice there. Well, I could talk to you for the next 20 hours straight, man. I got to tell you, I want to get at least one more thing in.
Sure.
Self-harm, which I had no idea, Aaron, how prevalent it is. And
prolific.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that and what's some of your advice there for both parents and teens?
Yeah. So for anybody who's listening, first of all, 25% of teenagers report having utilized self-harm as a way of facilitating a need, safety, power, connection, freedom, and worth. That's 1 out of every 4 kids. So understand it's that common. Okay. Wow. And it's a new phenomenon. Here's what everybody needs to know. Number one, we treat it in the mental health industry. We treat self-harm the exact same way we treat drug use and addiction with drugs. Mm-hmm. It's no different. There's a chemical imbalance in the brain that self-harm facilitates a temporary balancing of. Self-harm tends to come with low dopamine production. And when we cut, dopamine is released and we feel a boost. Mm. I've always asked teenagers, do you cut because you feel full or do you cut because you feel empty? First thing that comes to me is the answer, wow, nobody's ever asked me that. Because the first thing we do as parents is we see the result and we want to come in with the solve. Yeah. It doesn't work. Right. You are trying to change the course of the Grand Canyon. Your job, parents, is to follow the water source all the way back to that tiny little trickle on that mountaintop and that frozen ice cap that is sitting in the sun, that's dripping drip by drip, because it's that water on the top of the mountain that carves the path to the stream, that carves the path to the river, that carves a gorge. And then we try to change the results. And that's trying to dig an irrigation ditch into the Grand Canyon to divert the flow of energy. Mm. So we're going to go back to the top. Do you feel full or do you feel empty? Mm-hmm. And when they're able to say, and generally they say a little bit of both, then we just ask, which one's more? Is it the fullness or the emptiness? It's usually the fullness. Mm. They're so overwhelmed that when they cut, their brain just goes, bah, and releases all of it. And that's what dopamine makes you feel. It makes you feel good. Yeah. Yeah. So it releases it. Yeah. So now we know there's a dopamine issue, where I encourage parents to get the dopamine checked. And we begin the process of recovery. This is a mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and potentially financial recovery process. And I really help with this in my masterclass and really talk parents through it on here's what you got to do. But treat it as an addiction issue. It's not a bad choice. It's a risky one. It is not a sign of suicide. However, most children who attempt suicide have been self-harmers. So why is that so? Psychology is really struggling with the understanding. It's a dopamine issue, but seeing our own blood on a regular basis causes depression. And so it becomes depression. So it can start and end with depression, because depression is a dopamine issue too. X-ray the brain, folks. Check the brain. It's not an attitude. This is not about capability. I'm sorry, this is not about willingness. This is about capability. Willingness is attitude. I'm not willing to stop cutting. Versus, I have found something that makes me feel good when otherwise I feel terrible and I am non-functional. So I use it. It's a crutch.
Yeah. Wow. I'm speechless, man. Thank you so much for that and that education on there, because I do know some parents in my realm of work now that are struggling with that. And Aaron, this has been amazing. God bless everything you're doing. And
thank you, Kenny.
Please continue to do what you're doing. I feel like we scratched the surface, so I hope we're able to connect again, because there's so much more I'd love to ask you. But first, I don't want to let you go without please shouting from the mountaintops how people can connect with you. I'm sure that they can find your podcast, Beyond Risk and Back, on any platform, Apple, Spotify, wherever. How else can people connect with you, Aaron?
Yeah, you can always email me directly at aaron@firemountainprograms.com. I have a free and secret Facebook group for parents of teens that struggle called Parenting Teens That Struggle. It's absolutely free. I let you in the group, and parents help parents. Every now and then, I'll make sure you get some resources from me and some from other trusted people, but mainly it's parents helping parents. About 5,200 parents on there.
Wow.
helping each other out. And then if you're interested in getting started with working with me right away, go to brabapp.com, BRABAPP.com. That is my always $99 parenting masterclass, 56 guided at your own speed parenting masterclass, in the red, the yellow, and the green, the kids who are in deep crisis, the kids who are at risk, and the kids who are doing well. Now, how do we make it great? And you can always learn more about me on parentingteens.struggle.com. So Brab app for the masterclass, and Parenting Teens That Struggle on Facebook, and parentingteens.struggle.com for my website.
Got it all. Absolutely. And we'll make sure that in all the notes, so folks that are driving will be able to see it there. Aaron, I can't thank you enough for your time today, and for all of your wisdom, all of your knowledge. And again, keep doing what you're doing, man.
I will do, Kenny. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to your loyal audience. Appreciate you.
Oh, absolutely. We'll leave it there, folks. This has been the Leading from the Middle podcast with Kenny and with Aaron. We'll talk to you real soon.